Peter Kurten was born in Kolonmulle, Germany, on 26 May 1883. He was the eldest of 13 children, and his parents struggled to provide for their massive brood, which was confined to a small, one-room apartment. He grew up in extreme poverty, and also had to endure an abusive and alcoholic father. Coming home after an evening of drinking, the Kurten's patriarch would often rape his wife in plain view of his children. His father also served 3 years in prison for committing crimes of incest on Peter's 13-year-old sister. Peter Kurten, by his own accounts, got an early start on his murderous career. After he was caught in 1930, he described to a court-appointed psychologist that at the age of just 9 years old, he killed 2 of his classmates. In his version of the events, he pushed one boy into a nearby river, and when another jumped in to help him, Kurten held the second boy under the water, resulting in the drowning death of both children. He never faced any consequences for this particular crime. Suffering from a chaotic and unstable life at home, at the age of 9, Kurten formed a strange and unhealthy bond with a neighbor. The man who happened to be a dog catcher, he introduced Kurten to the practice of bestiality, another dark turn on his path to mass murder. As he grew into his late teens and early 20s, Kurten expanded his bestiality to farm animals, including cattle, goats, and sheep. It was during this experimentation that he discovered how much pleasure he derived from stabbing a creature to death during intercourse, a practice he would carry on as he graduated to violating humans. Before escalating to murdering his victims directly, Kurten set a series of fires. He told police he set the fires because he found them sexually stimulating. He said, "When my desire for injuring people awoke, the love of setting fire to things awoke as well." When Peter Kurten advanced to regularly committing murder, he did so with an unflinching brutality. His victims, more often than not, were young girls who were subjected to unthinkable horrors in their final moments. He often raped his victims while simultaneously stabbing them, sometimes upwards up to 25 times, and then climaxing at the perceived moment of their death. His homicidal fantasies were strong and sadistic and gave him unique sexual pleasure. After his conviction, he recalled an instance to his psychologist where he had witnessed a man fall under a train. Feigning an effort to help the injured and dying man, he simply wanted to get close to the sight of blood, which caused him to reflexively climax on the spot. One does not acquire a nickname like the Vampire of Dusseldorf for committing some homicides. Peter Kurten earned that title from the German press after a startling discovery was made at his various crime scenes. It seemed that Kurten suffered from a particularly unusual paraphilia. He received sexual pleasure from drinking the blood of victims. His usual mode was to stab his victims, then put his mouth on their open wounds and drink directly from their bloodstream. It's not uncommon for serial killers, especially necrophiles, to return to the scenes of their crimes. Peter Kurten also engaged in this practice, most notably after he had murdered 10-year-old Christine Klein. Kurten had killed the young girl in her home while her parents were working downstairs in the pub. When he returned to the scene the next day, he looked on in delight as horror had swept the community. Klein's uncle would later become a suspect in the murder and face trial, a proceeding which Kurten followed quite closely. As he began getting more press for heinous crimes, Peter Kurten reveled in his newfound celebrity. Feeding the rampant hysteria, Kurten reached out to a local newspaper on 9 November 1929 and provided a map to the body of his most recent victim. The map proved to be accurate and led authorities to the body of 5-year-old Gertrude Alberman, who had been stabbed to death placed under a pile of rubble. It's believed that she was killed 2 days before Kurten had sent his letter. Had he been able to suppress his murderous appetite, there is a possibility that Peter Kurten may have never faced justice for his crimes. In 1929, a man called Strasberg was arrested for committing sexual assaults that were similar in description to Kurten's. Strasberg, who suffered from severe learning disabilities, falsely confessed to all of Kurten's crimes and was sent to an asylum for the criminally insane. German authorities, believing they had caught the Dusseldorf monster, received a rude awakening in August of 1929, when foster sisters Gertrude Hammerchard and Louise Lenzen were abducted from a fairground and brutally murdered. The double homicide overturned Strasberg's conviction and reopened the case. Peter Kurten received 9 death sentences and was put to execution by guillotine. Kurten, for his part, was strangely excited by the possibility of his fate, and asked a doctor before his death, "Will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? I mean, that's some scary stuff." After being told that that may be possible, Kurten surmised that it would be the pleasure to end all pleasures. While no one knows for sure if Kurten's severed head got to hear its separation from his body, you can pay its mummified remains a visit at its current home in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. Kurten's head was preserved after his death for the purposes of scientific study, and at some point it ended up in the hands of a private estate, where it was eventually purchased by the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum.